Hello everyone, I'm Alex. I'm a game coder and long-time jammer. Just out of curiosity, who here has competed in game jams before? Okay, not many. Hopefully I can convince you to do some. Oh geez, this is a really ugly screen. So this is my game. I'm making it with one artist and an audio designer as well. It's called Gerrymander, Rig the Election. It's about the political practice of gerrymandering. If you've ever looked at an American electoral map, they have a real big problem with this, where the districts are intentionally created to favor one party. So we kind of thought that's a bit of a puzzle in a way, and turned it into a game, which you can see over on the left. This here is North Carolina, and you can just look at this ugly thing here. That's an electoral district. That's ridiculous. So why does jamming matter? Well, for the most part, it seems like it's not going to help you directly, because you don't make money from jamming usually. There are exceptions where some teams have gone on to make pretty successful games out of a game jam. Has anyone heard of Think of the Children? Yeah? Wow, okay. They're a Brisbane team who last year in the 48-hour game jam made a game, and they've been working on it all year, and it's being released, I think, next month. They've got funding from Surprise Attack down in Melbourne, so you can make money directly from a jam game. It's rare, but the experience you get from jamming is being able to take a game directly from the beginning to the end. It's not like a whole project, but you still go through all the phases of making a game. All the designing, all the mistakes you're going to make. That is a pretty valuable experience, I think. You don't learn as much as you would spending a month or several months making a game, but just being able to get it all done at once, there's a lot you can learn doing that. It's a pretty good test for your skills as well. It's really not very easy to make a game in 48 hours, especially not a good one. So getting one done is just you're pushing your skills to the max. You're pushing your whatever it is, coding, art. You're having to do it on a deadline, under pressure. Which is another thing, is that you're going to have to want to learn how to efficiently manage your time in any kind of development. Having only 48 hours to make something, it's extremely valuable to have that set out and make the most out of that time, because you can apply that to other projects, Even if you have several months to make a game, you can apply the same thinking as you would to a 48-hour game jam, because you're trying to efficiently maximize the use of your time. The other thing is that in any game, you're going to make mistakes. It's better to make those mistakes in a 48-hour period where there's no real consequences. If you've gone with a bad design, if your game just sucks, it doesn't really matter. If you get invested into your first game project ever, and you spend a year of your life making a game, and at the end of it, it's just terrible, you've wasted a year of your life. If you can learn those mistakes in just 48-hour game jams, you won't have to make the same mistakes over a longer period of time. It's also something really good for a portfolio. A portfolio looks kind of empty if you just have one student game, one project you kind of worked in. Having a few game jam games just really beefs it up, shows what you've worked on, There obviously can't be the star of your portfolio, but I've got mine filled up with a fair few in there. And lastly, it's safe to experiment. So if you're wanting to experiment with like a new technology or some new art styles, techniques you've wanted to try, a game jam environment is a safe space to experiment with that. It's the same as making mistakes. You're better off trying to do the experimentation in like a brief period rather than over a year. Like the first time I made a VR game was, well, I made a VR like not game before, but I was in a team for a game jam a few years ago, and we did a VR game. That was my first time really properly making a game in that environment. If I'd spent time properly a year or whatever making a game in VR, I would have no idea what to expect from it at the end. So this is more focused towards just jamming. Most people, or I at least, my first game jam thought it was a great idea to just not sleep the entire 48 hours because that would be the most effective use of my time. Every year some new people still think that, there's always going to be people who think that, and you're wrong. I learned the hard way that that's just a stupid way to think, because if you do the maths on this, if you say have 12 hours total sleeping over 48, you only have 36 work hours. 36 is less than 48, but the thing is, if you don't sleep at all, a good chunk of that 48 hours you're going to be working at like half or less efficiency. When you don't sleep, you're just going to be making really, really simple mistakes, just putting a greater than instead of a less than sign, or just making code that makes no sense. You're going to just have moments where you just look at your code in confusion, like you could just write something and then just be like, well, oh, what am I doing? And take like 2 minutes to like remember what you were doing. And you just start to very quickly lose any motivation you have to keep working. This kind of goes not just for 48 hours. I mean, it's more important for any game jams. But in general, if you're working on a longer project, it's also kind of relevant that you have to have sleep, you have to have moments where you're not constantly coding, constantly working in a game, because you will just burn out way quicker and it will suck. So in a game jam, and outside of a game jam, you always have to be, with every feature you add in a game, you have to be comparing cost and impact of that feature. By cost, I mean how much is it going to take you to implement this feature in a game. By impact, I mean how much of a difference it makes to your final product. You have to think about this constantly, because if you don't, you're going to end up spending too much time on a feature that just is meaningless and doesn't actually add anything to the game. You need to spend some time thinking about what is actually valuable to your game. Cut anything that is just, it's not going to make a big difference and it's going to take a long time to implement. And just look for anything. There's always going to be a lot of things that it'll take you like 30 seconds to put this in the game, and it's going to make a pretty nice difference. Seek those things out and add them, because they're going to make a big difference in the end. Yeah, a little bit of polish, it makes a huge difference. And this also applies to all roles in the game. So I might think to myself, this feature is super simple, I can have it done in like 2 minutes, but that feature might not be as easy on the artists. The artist might have to spend a week doing the assets for this. Or it could go the other way, where something that the artist could do in like a minute, you know, I might have to spend like a week coding implementing it. So have the conversations with your team on features and see if anything is going to be too much work for one member. So has everyone seen the Juice to Lose It talk? No? Okay, Google the Juice to Lose It talk, because it's like the best talk ever. It's better than this one. I don't even know why you're here going. If you haven't seen it, you should just go Googling that one. So the brief summary of it is that there are these little improvements that you can make to your game that add a lot of polish and just a lot of well, they call it juice. It's like a vaguely defined term that encompasses a whole lot of things. It makes a huge difference in the end if you just go through everything they say in that video and just see how these things can apply to your game. I'm going to go through a few kind of related things. So one thing is transitions. The thing with game jams is often you kind of leave your UI and stuff to the last minute. It's not like very polished, but often just adding like a little bit of character to the transitions makes a huge difference. So a lot of games will just, you have one scene and then load level, you're in a different scene. It feels just kind of clunky. A lot of UI might be popping up just like all you're doing is going set active on the UI, and you have the menu up. It just doesn't look very good though. It doesn't have any feeling. It just looks kind of dull and static. So what we've done here for Gerrymander, you see, press the button, you have this shader come in, and we're in the level now, and then, you can look at all these little things that are coming in. This slides in from the bottom, she slides in. That doesn't just, the speech bubble doesn't just pop in, it actually expands. Also worth noting here, buttons, they make a big difference just making them actually interact with you, not just being static things. These are really easy things to add in any context, either with Game Jam or in a longer project. It makes just an amazing difference. So the 12 principles of animation is something that we've relied on a little bit in Game Jams. You can get quite a lot out of these. I'm going to go through all the 12 principles here. Some of them aren't really that relevant, but the big one is squash and stretch and overextension. So you'll see here, everything on the screen, this victory thing, it comes up, it pops, it actually gets extended as it reaches its top, and then comes down and expands to a little bigger than it has to be, and then before shrinking back down to its proper size. It also shoots a little bit higher than where it ends up. It goes past its endpoint and then back down. A lot of those things just really, it's a nice thing to add to your UI, just make them really pop and feel alive. Not just UI, but any animation. The other thing you can do is consider, if you're just a coder, it's worth knowing some of these, because some of these can be applied dynamically through code. In like my student project back in like years and years ago, we had like a little ball that you could move around, and one of the things I did with code was properly use squash and stretch when it jumped. So no matter what direction you jumped in, it was stretching in that direction. And just adds a lot of feeling to it. Yeah, Google the 12 principles of animation if you aren't familiar with it, just make sure. So in all our game jams, we've had really exceptionally good audio. We even won, I think, 13. We won an award for best audio because it was that good. A lot of people leave this to last and they don't really think it's that important. A lot of people download from free sounds, whatever. It's not good. People can tell it just sounds wrong. The difference that having an actual audio person in your project makes is huge. It's not just having the audio person though, it's also the implementation. You don't want to have, like a lot of bad games kind of have like footsteps that don't vary. They're just like the same sound over and over again for every footstep. And if you put that in your game, it's going to drive the player crazy. Or the music doesn't transition right. So we've always had, in our game jams, one thing we do is have like a proper like spreadsheet that has all the sounds listed, and the audio designer will put like the Dropbox link to all those sounds and instructions for me to follow and how he wants those things implemented. Like, it's important to keep those and to follow those. In some of our earlier game jams, we actually worked with an audio artist who was based overseas. He produced terrific work, but it did create a bit of a problem that he wasn't in the room with us, because he couldn't like just come over and listen to the game and be like, oh, let's tweak that a bit, let's tweak that, you know, or recognize that a sound hadn't been put in or put in properly. Having an actual audio artist there, physically present, has been just made a huge difference to our game, because we can have these conversations about implementation. Yeah, don't use free sound or any of that crap. Don't. Get an audio person. Another thing we've learned is to put personality into the game. It's a bit of a vague concept. Some of our earlier stuff, it was lifeless. It didn't have any real character to it. So, you know, it was inconsistent with the art. Like our very first one, it was just, there was a lot of the things were just cubes, and it was just ugly and just didn't feel like a real game. But adding a little bit of personality, we learned, helps really establish like an emotional connection with the player. So we do this through making art consistent, as you can see here. It's just all sprite work. It's all just very alive, and it feels like it works, like it's in the same world together. You can't hear it because it's a GIF, but the sound in this game is amazing, and it really is it's like 8-bit, so it really fits with the pixel art. We've also focused a fair bit on like putting flavor text in. So this game, you might not be able to read it on this damn screen, but you know, you have these little characters here. Each one of these people have like different personalities, and they're reacting to what's going on in the world, actually kind of giving the player hints through there. So yeah, spend time on all those things. Like writing is kind of important, to have like some personality and characters come across in your game. Don't make another like, there's a lot of games that are just like generic space shooters or whatever. They don't, you know, they might be good technically, but if you don't have like a bit of personality come across, it's not going to like really engage with anyone. It's just going to be like, you're a spaceship flying through space and you shoot things. It doesn't, you know, who cares? But you know, if you make a spaceship flying through space and you're a cool fox with some animal friends, then people are going to buy that game and they like it. So we added a lot of personality to Gerrymander. Some things we've done is like add the characters that pop up through the game. A lot of it's like tutorial text, sort of functional stuff. We've actually kind of given them personalities. There's a few different characters, like there's a spy who pops up to give you hints, and they all have different writing personalities associated with them. They have animations that come in that really sells them. Functional text, like for example our loading screens, it's not just loading ... I've made it so there's like a random generation thing where it picks like a verb and a noun from a list and creates something like decimating the electoral process, or something equally as silly as that. It's like a small thing, but that kind of thing just adds like personality to the whole game. We're being consistent with our style. So everything is this very pixel art sort of thing, even our UI. If you notice, it's all very pixel art based. The big character is just like an expanded version of these little characters here. It's important to just keep it all together, because if you have inconsistent UI, obviously it doesn't come together and doesn't convey anything to the player. Yeah, we've chosen to use these people. Like, it was a decision we made early on. We could have just gone with like abstract dots instead of actual people, but we went with people because it lets them do like the animations, and all of them do like, you know, when you put them in a region of their color, they jump up and down and cheer. When they're losing in a region, they go and start crying. They also do things like wave at each other. It's just like a little simple thing I programmed where one of them will like turn to like the right and go like, oh, and then one over here will go like, oh, and wave back. It's like a small little thing that has like no impact on gameplay, but it just adds a lot of character to the game and makes it a bit more engaging. We've also made some like deliberate choices with the music. Again, our music artist is great. He's made this great little theme for like the main menu. It sounds like a middle school band is playing like political, like an anthem or something. It sounds kind of bad in a good way, and just really adds like a whole feeling to the game that you wouldn't get otherwise. Like you're at a political rally, you know? So one thing we've learned in our game jams is to accept evolution of games. Often the idea we start out with at the beginning of the 48 hours is not going to be the same thing exactly at the end. It's perfectly fine to let things evolve and let things play out as you go along. So part of that is that we have to, even when we're not in a rush in like Gerrymander, you have to kind of be quick to get to the next point in your game development plan, because every time you get to a new point, you can make these kind of decisions where maybe, you know, what if we did this? What if this was implemented? What if we cut this feature out? So it might not feel like you have this like whole game plan set out, and it's like, oh yeah, I can make that by November, or whatever. But you're not accounting for all the moments where you have to pivot. In a game jam, you only have so long to make your initial design, so you can't spend too much time just thinking about what you're already planning and just planning it. And that applies to larger scale games in general, because I've seen a lot of developers who just spend months and months of their time planning their game before putting anything to code. You know, if they spend, you know, if they have their first idea, they go, oh, that's an interesting idea, and then just code that, see how it feels. They can plan better, be like, okay, well, this feels a little bit empty, maybe it's missing something, what can I add? But if you just try and like keep it all in your head, keep it all on paper, just designing for like a year, you're not going to get anywhere very fast, because you're focused on, you know, you're not getting any actual answers. All you're doing is, it's all just in your head. So yeah, it's really important that as soon as you start having some ideas, to start prototyping, to start experimenting around with it. Don't be like one of those developers who just spends years thinking about it. There is such thing as bad ideas. I think there's like a thing people say where it's like, there's no such thing as bad ideas, only bad execution, but there are bad ideas. Our 2014 48-hour game jam was just terrible. We planned these in-depth mechanics, and it was complicated, and none of it came out in the end. And it's kind of, again, lucky that it was just a game jam, because we could learn and say, okay, well, that was just a mess. We'll move on from it. It wasn't one of our best moments. Everyone makes mistakes. It was a bad prototype, I guess. As you add new features to a game, you also do have to cut old stuff. Don't be afraid to kind of prune as you add. It's easy to just add features to a game. It's sometimes a bit harder to feel like you're justified in taking something out, but sometimes taking something out can be just as good as adding something in. Maybe that thing you have in your game, it's a feature that is actually detracting from it, or it's going to take too much time to make, and it's not going to make much of a difference. Or just doesn't have a purpose in your game now that you've changed the rest of it. One of our game jams, I think 2016, we had original design for like, it's sort of a VR game anyway. We had like bombs in our game, and we got to like the second day, we're just like, the game's fun. We don't need bombs in our game. It doesn't add anything to it. Let's just cut them out. I felt a bit like, oh, do we have to cut it? Oh, I don't want to cut it. That was important to our game, you know? But it turns out that we could cut it. It was fine. The game was actually really great. It won the best game in the Pro League. That feature wasn't needed after all. And hell, maybe it would have made the game worse. So one thing a game jam can teach you is to be realistic about your expectations. You're basically deciding in 40, you know, at the start of 48 hours, what can you do in 48 hours? You will find probably that you won't be able to do what you did in 48 hours, what you expected to be able to do in 48 hours. It's always going to end up, you're always going to overestimate. That's kind of natural. The same goes for like a longer period where you say, okay, here's our plan for a game. We can get this done by 2 months. That's actually what we said for Gerrymander in February. I think, how long was that ago? It ballooned a little bit. We actually had another project was on, it didn't really get that far in development, but before Gerrymander we worked on this other game that just became a total catastrophe because we got really ambitious with all the things we wanted to add to it, and we just kind of kept going like, okay, here's like a problem we have in the game design. What do we add to fix it? Okay, we've got this new thing, but now this is also a problem. What can we add to fix it? We just kept kind of adding things and trying to like, we all had different ideas of what we wanted from the game, so it's kind of being pulled in different directions all at once. And we never really cut back on anything, just said, okay, here's like the core of our game, here's what we need to like focus on, let's do that. We just kept adding like ideas until it just became impossible for us to ever accomplish. So yeah, try and identify early on like what your game's core aesthetics are. And I mean by that, like, you know, is this like a puzzle game? Is this like about like Twitch reactions? If you're thinking about features that don't really hold that up, then maybe they can be cut. Focus on things that can actually like hold up what you want out of your game, you know? Is it an RPG? Is it like about a story? Is it, you know? It's different for every game, but you got to kind of ask those questions. Yeah. So it's also, every game jam we've been in, we've had, well, all the successful ones anyway, we've kind of been able to say at the start, okay, here's like the core of our game. This is what we need to have done, and there'll be some extra things that like, yeah, we'd like to have this. Like our last global game jam earlier this year, we originally planned to have like 4 character classes for you to pick from. Thought that'd be kind of cool and fun, but we always knew making it that 2 is probably what we would end up with. The other ones would be nice to have if we could, but after 48 hours we weren't quite in the position, well, more like after halfway through we're like, okay, we're not really in the position where we can do those other 2, let's cut them. It's lucky that, well, I didn't focus on trying to do anything with those before then. So it's important to like, all I was doing before then was focusing on what was core, like the actual player controller, the enemies, and the 2 character classes we had. And it's the same for any longer projects. You have to like focus on what you have as a core, get that done, and then anything that you feel like, oh, here's a nice idea I had, you know, let's add character customization in. You know, that sounds nice to have character customization in your game, but is it important? Or can you maybe like hold that to the side until like you have the time to work on that? And sometimes you will end up finding the time to work on it. Nice surprise that you'll be able to pick some of those things out and add them in. So it's important to test your ideas. In the Global Game Jam 20, I want to say 15. Yeah, I said it on the slide, so there we go. We did our first paper prototyping of the game. However, we didn't really account for the whole game. So basically the game was, you are like sort of looking over this apartment, there are 4 people living in the apartment, and problems keep happening. Like, you know, the TV will go on static, or like a ghost will appear, all kinds of stuff. And what you'd have to do as a player would be find an object in the house, use it to solve that problem. And then another problem will pop up and you have to find another object to solve the next problem, so on and so on and so on. So we had it all planned out, we did it on paper, had some people play it, and they kind of liked it. It worked pretty well. The thing is we didn't do is that in the actual game we had a lose state, which wasn't put in the paper prototype. We actually had like the people running around the apartment, if they were staring at a problem for too long, they'd start to go insane and freak out and then collapse on the floor, and once everyone collapsed on the floor, it was game over. We didn't really bother prototyping that in the paper prototype. Turns out that having that in made a huge difference to player behavior. Originally, in the paper prototype, people were very willing to just sort of pick up a thing and go, oh, does this work here? No, it doesn't? Okay. This experimenting. As soon as we added the time pressure in, people just like shut down. As soon as there was a problem that they couldn't solve, they're just like, I don't know, and freaked out. So it's important to account for everything in paper prototyping. Gerrymander is actually first started as a paper prototype. A puzzle game is very easy to paper prototype, obviously. It's not something you can do for just any game. But originally it was just me going, okay, here's like some X's and some circles, and let's try and like solve that. So your whole team needs to play your game. We learned the hard way the first time we competed in a game jam. I was the only one really playing the game, and by the end it was impossible to finish, because I was kind of building the game for myself, a person who had spent the last 2 days working on this thing. I was pretty damn good at the mechanics. Turns out there's someone just sort of comes in who hasn't picked it up before, they can't do it. It was impossible. It was just too difficult. This is true of like any project. You are the ones making the game. It's going to be very, very easy for you to play it. You're going to be so good at this game. You're going to be in the top 1% of people who at this game. That's why it's important for your first level to be something that you think is so trivial that anyone can solve it. Make everything easier than what you expect, because you can't design around your own skill. That's why the first level in Gerrymander is actually just like there are like 9 people. You have to draw I can finish it in like 2 seconds, but a new player obviously is going to take like still a minute or so to finish it. Also, your whole team needs to play it just so that they can see that, oh, hey, my art asset's implemented wrong. And always get new people to play. Don't just have the same people testing your game. If you're in a game jam, what we always do is, sometimes try and do is test with other people in the game jam. Like, let's me play your game, I play yours. Something like this is a great event for maybe people to bring their games to and share it. Just try and find people out there who haven't played your game before, see how they react to it. It's easy to kind of get in the mentality that, oh, this game's simple, it's obvious, anyone can pick it up, but then you put it in the hands of someone who's never seen this before, and they're just completely confused, and you don't understand even why they're confused. Yeah, make it a priority to get new players. The other thing we learned is don't overcomplicate things. Our best game jams have always had the simplest ideas. Just like a sort of basic twin stick sort of shooter game. There was just a platformer. Like at the core, there's just a really basic game there. We put our own twists on them, obviously, but they never are like at their core really complicated. One of our worst games was Volcanic Panic, which was just, I couldn't really explain the rules effectively here because it was just that complicated. It wasn't fun to play. It wasn't easy to balance. It was just a nightmare. So with Gerrymander, we did try and keep things very simple. We had a lot of different ideas with how we would draw a district. It ended up being just the simplest to just have the player being able to, like, you know, tap on a line and have it activate or deactivate. You know, there's actually a few other kind of things you might find on the internet that are kind of follow the same thing of making a game based on gerrymandering. A lot of them really do kind of push towards being more of a literal representation of it, where, you know, you're drawing sort of, following the rules a bit closer, drawing, like, you know, more complicated patterns. We just wanted to keep it in a grid, just a really basic grid with a few people in it. You know, they're representational. There's like, it's not, yeah, it's super, super simple. We actually cut a few concepts from the game because they were just a bit, they were complex without actually adding anything related to the game. We also were able to, with a simple base of the game, we were able to do some simple rule variation. So we've added, originally it was just one person per square. It was pretty easy to just say, okay, there's 2 or 3 or 0 people as well. And that added quite a little bit of extra depth to the game, and it wasn't that much of a complicated thing for, like, the player to realize, like, oh, okay, there's 2 people in a square, that's worth 2 points. That players usually get it pretty quickly. Speaking of players getting things, tutorials are the worst thing. When in a game jam, I find I'm always having to kind of be there, and particularly in the 48-hour game, well, in the 48-hour game jam, there's often a few questions the player will have, and the lucky thing is I am there to physically say, okay, here, let me explain that. You don't really have time in a game jam to, like, properly experiment with tutorialization, but it's really, really important outside of one. In a game jam, you kind of have to rely on just putting, like, a title screen that says, here are the controls, here's your goal, go do it. As soon as you kind of put it out into the wild, you have to actually have players sit down and, like, see if, okay, I'm going to give you the game, see if you can learn it. A lot of devs might make the mistake of giving a player a game to play with, and then, you know, you're in the room with them, so the player asks, oh, what does this mean? Don't answer their questions. Like, if a player asks you a question about the game, don't ever answer any of their questions, because the players who play it, you know, they've downloaded it from the internet somewhere, they don't have you there to answer your questions. So you need to make sure that your game can be understood by someone who doesn't have you in the room with them. You need to have some kind of text usually explaining a few things, but keep in mind that people don't read it. They will just skip through it half the time. You do maybe have to be a bit smart about where you put it, like, don't put it all in at once, or try and, like, you know, put a little bit of here, and then the next level sort of explains a new concept, and generally try and, like, teach through design over that. Multiplayer helps. It's just a thing we've learned from the game jams, that when you have 2 people trying to figure out a game together, they kind of, like, talk to each other a bit, like, oh, I see, if I press square, that fires a missile, cool, I get it, I get what I have to do now. It's like 2 heads are better than one thing. It's also important to keep in mind throughout the whole development process, people learning the game. Every UI element has to be kind of thought of in, does this explain what's going on? Does everything make sense and tell the player what's happening? Like one example in, actually I might have a GIF of it, I'll screw it later. But like when you complete a region in Gerrymander, a bunch of stars shoot up into the UI where the score counter is, just to indicate that, hey, this region you just drew, that increased your score. So keep in mind, just keep making decisions based on the idea that a new player will be able to like understand what's going on just by looking at the screen. Yeah, and it is acceptable in a game jam. It is kind of acceptable that your game might be a little bit hard to understand, but anyone playing a game in a game jam probably isn't the casual user. So working with others is like an essential part of game development. What we've learned in our game jam experience was it's really important to have designated roles. So by that I mean that usually when I have like multiple programmers working together, one of us will just specialize on one thing and the other on the other. Our last game jam was the VR one. I mainly focused on, it was sort of like it was like a asymmetrical multiplayer. One player was in VR, then 1 to 4 players was playing on the gamepad. I focused mainly on the gamepad players. The other programmer focused on the VR because he's really experienced with VR. Having it kind of built that way means there's a lot less stepping on toes. It's much easier to just work on your section, work on the others, and but keep in mind what the other person is doing so you don't create code that's not really going to work together in the end. Same goes to art. Kind of have, actually, is everyone just a programmer here, or are they like artists, or anyone who's like not a programmer? Yeah, designers or artists, or yeah. It's a bit of kind of, yeah. Same thing with art is it's important to have, this person's sort of the concept artist, so their style is going to be the base for the game. The same VR project I was just talking about, we had 3 artists, but one of them was like the core concept artist. All her art was the base for any of the 3D models. So that made everything sort of consistently, visually consistent. God damn. Yeah, it's best not to have like too flat of a hierarchy. Like it's sort of nice to have this kind of feeling of like, oh, we're all equal in this project, but that kind of does end up to the whole, we all have different things we want out of it. It's good to have someone who's like, okay, I'm sort of going to have the last word on this subject. I'm going to be the one who's in charge of the visual style. I'm going to be the one in charge of, all our programming decisions or whatever. Depends on your project, the size of your team. It is kind of important to have some verticality with your hierarchy. It is still nice to have a little bit of a feeling that, like, we never go in fully like, I'm the boss, I'm in charge. We're all kind of equal, but one of us is still usually the authority in certain areas. Conversations are really important with your team. So whenever there's like an asset or a feature in a game, make sure you have that conversation with the entire team regarding how it's going to be implemented. Because the last thing you want is to kind of have the artist and the programmer coming in from different directions and finding that you kind of had different expectations for how this was going to be implemented. It might seem at first like, oh, there's only one way I could possibly implement it, but then that's the other person's thinking too. It can also be really good for solving problems. We've had a lot of moments where we've had like a problem we have to solve in our design, and we're like, okay, what do we do here? It might turn out that it might be like a really big task for me, or it might be like a really, really small task for someone else, depending on how you approach it. Could this be done by the artist, like making like a whole huge amount of like art assets or could I just like step in and do like a quick shader and it'll be done in like 10 minutes? Have those conversations about how to solve problems in a way that is going to minimize everyone's time investment. We probably do spend a lot of time on our game jams just like planning that kind of thing out. Like, okay, you're going to do this and I'm going to do that, and cool, we're good. It's like, it really doesn't take that long to do. Just make sure you do it. Being mixed skilled really helps those conversations. So if you kind of are a bit like, you know, you don't have to be a great artist, but if you kind of have a little bit of like knowledge of like color theory or the principles of animation or whatever, it helps having these conversations with the artist. You know, if you're an artist, then it helps knowing a little bit about coding, or, you know, but everyone kind of needs to know a little bit about game design to really have those conversations. You know, if you're an artist, you could, it helps kind of be like, okay, I can make this enemy look spikier, that'll make them more dangerous, you know. Yeah, lastly, there's these sort of moments, it's always been conversations I've had where don't make assumptions about other people's time investment on certain things. It's very easy, like I've had all the conversations where it's like, oh, here's this feature, it should be like simple, right? Turns out that feature is actually not quite that simple to implement. But other times it's been like, here's a thing, could we add it? Yeah, sure, it's like 10 minutes of work. You know, if you're not a programmer, sometimes, well, if you're not, and it's good to ask with anyone, like have those conversations. Like don't assume that someone else is going to spend a lot of time on this, raise it and just not raise the point. Like have that conversation at least, so you know, okay, yeah, that is going to be a big job. Let's cut it. Let's try and work together on how we can find a way around this, do something slightly different, or divide the work more equitably. There are some advantages to working alone. I've only ever done one game jam alone. It was the Game Maker's Toolkit game jam. Just sort of like, I want to kind of see, how could I do by myself? So as I was saying in the conversation, it does make it a little easier having those conversations when you're having them with yourself. The downside is that obviously I have to split my work across art and sound and programming and design, and it ends up kind of being a little bit subpar in everything. Yeah, so I had to obviously cut quite a few corners with the art here, just make everyone like balls, because I had to focus on the programming instead. It's less people tend to be more efficient on a project individually. We've actually had, I think, one of the best game jams we ever did was just 3 people. An audio designer, an artist, and me, the programmer. When you start getting bigger teams, you start working a bit less efficiently because you're having to like not step in each other's feet, you're having to talk to each other a lot more. So the optimal size can really depend on the project and the team. Like we had in university that was like when we split to do our final year projects, there was one team that was like 9 people, and it was just, they fell apart by the halfway through the year because they weren't doing work equally and they were bickering, and yeah, you don't want like 9 people on an indie team. Simple solutions are great. So in our first unofficial game jam, we weren't officially in the 48-hour game jam because we got our submissions too late. So we're just like, let's just do it at one of our houses and do it anyway. We're probably lucky that we didn't actually have to get to the game jam, because what we made was terrible. It was 2 programmers working on the project, me and another programmer, and at the start, so one of the main features of our game was going to be an asteroid that you could bury your way through. We kind of originally disagreed on the best approach to that. I just thought, maybe we just like have spheres, and when you collide with them, they get deleted. Whereas he wanted to do like proper vector stuff where you delete and like reconstruct a vector every time you move through the asteroid. It's a doable feature, but it wasn't doable in 48 hours when we're like first year university students. So yeah, we went with his solution. He was in charge of doing it. I worked on the other aspects of the code, like the player controller. It didn't really come to fruition by the end of the 48 hours. It wasn't even there, because you just couldn't get it working properly. It might have been easier if we just went with the simple solution of the sphere colliders. If you touch them, they get deleted. It certainly has its disadvantages, but it would have been doable. Our second was also kind of terrible, because we had the idea of randomly generating our levels, which is stupid, because why would we do that? It was like, people are going to play this once and then never again. Why do we need it different every time? I don't know, but we chose that would be the way we went. In the end, it was just bad. The levels were just unplayable. It would have been so much easier for us to just make, because there only had to be one level actually, to just make that level and be done with it. It would have taken an hour, make a decent level at most, whereas we spent instead half the time making a terrible level generator. So this is an app, 2 apps that I kind of keep on my phone, just because they're kind of interesting, and maybe I get to talk about them one day. So they both, I guess they want to be like the Instagram of 3D photos. I'm not sure if there's a market for that, but whatever. So they both work the same way. You take out your phone, you kind of take a photo and you move it around a bit, and it makes like a photo that is 3D, is more like a hologram where like you tilt your phone and it looks like, oh, it's 3D, that's cool. But they both had different solutions to solving that problem. This one, scene, it's actually like generating a proper 3D model. Like it's actually scanning the thing, trying to like make a 3D file. And it's a little hard to tell because it's just a still image. But there's like a huge amount of distortion here. It looks really, really bad when you're actually using it. It doesn't work on glass or anything transparent. It's really ugly. It's not the best photo I could get for it. It looks way worse when you're actually looking at 3D. Like you see here, there's like, it's sort of assumed that the cup is part of the background. The other one is just basically, it takes a video when you do that, and then it stabilizes it a bit, and then attaches it to the phone's gyroscope, and it looks way better. It works basically. Obviously, there are downsides to the solution, that you can't tilt it vertically, that it's probably a bit bigger in the file size, but it actually functions as it's meant to. I can't really say that for scene because it doesn't. And certainly the thing is, scene probably spent a lot longer working on that. So yeah, we've learned to appreciate trying to like focus on finding the simplest solutions rather than trying to think. It is kind of tempting to be like, oh, I'm going to be smart and do like the complex, really clever solution that has all these cool benefits to doing it. Sometimes maybe recognize that those benefits aren't worth such a big time investment and a worse overall product. RAM generation is a good example of that. So as I was saying earlier, our game with the RAM generation, it was a disaster. We didn't need to use RAM generation. We chose to anyway. We couldn't implement a good RAM generation in 48 hours. I think it's worth asking in any game that you're trying to use RAM generation, does your game actually need this? Because there is a bit of a tendency lately for indie games to sort of just put it in because it's fun to code. Or because it's like, oh, well, it has to be replayable. Like a player has to be able to play this like 10 times and not get bored, and they might get bored if it's the same. You should ask the question, like, does it need to be infinite? And is your game going to be boring if the content is repeated at all? It's sort of like you end up with just noise. Like our Springwell, the game jam, it could generate technically an infinite number of unique levels, but all of them felt exactly the same. If you handcraft a level, on the other hand, you can take a few assets and find all the interesting ways to arrange it. Because there are only really, there's an infinite number of ways to arrange these assets, but only 0.1% of those are actually interesting ways. That being said, we did use RAM generation and gerrymandering because we do want to have infinitely playable content or new puzzles every time you play a level. Because once you've solved a puzzle, you've solved it forever. So we had to be pretty clever with the way we did our RAM generation. It couldn't just be, throw them out on the field and hope for the best. Because the way Gerrymander works is there has to be a solution. So that's the first step we had to go through, is okay, I had to code it so that there would always be a valid solution for every level. Basically the way I start that is by actually starting with the solution, by and then just, I guess, removing the fences is the way I put it. We actually went through a few iterations of the RAM generation, which is important to do because this is the stuff that's making your level. It needs to be right. The first one we went through it was basically I'd give it a specific shape to match, and it'd fill something out in that. And the thing is, in some cases, if I put 1 pixel in the wrong place, it would crash. So I had to be very specific with my shapes. They had to be very boring shapes because otherwise it would crash. When it did create a level, it was often kind of samey. It took a very long time on some levels to even make something. Eventually I got through a certain way through after a while working on it. Just like, okay, this is not working. Let's pull back, cut all this code away, and find a new way to do a RAM generation that wasn't trying to fit in a pre-given shape. So what I ended up doing was instead making it just start generating a district, then find a place to attach that district, generate, find another place to attach, generate, and that worked a lot better. There were a few things I added to experiment with how it generates, because originally I noticed that it would tend to generate very blocky, square, predictable districts, which is a little boring, and it's not really the whole point of the game, is to let the player make more curvy and weird districts. So what I ended up doing was just adding a little bit of code to just say, okay, try and prioritize picking a new place to place a tile that's further away from the last one you placed. If you're doing any RAM generation, it's really important to just iterate on it and understand what actually makes the game fun. It's good even to make some handcrafted levels, just to see, okay, this is kind of the gold standard. This is what I'm aiming for. This is what I want my RAM generation to be able to spit out. So what matters most when coding? The first one is it does what it's meant to. That's kind of obvious, but people do get kind of caught up in arguments about tabs and spaces and all that. I don't care about that kind of thing. All I think the most important thing is it getting the design's intention across. The second most important thing is that you kind of limit the amount of bugs. Bugs are terrible, they're frustrating, and they can just really, really, really derail a project if you have too many of them. That's why I like to keep my code kind of simple. More complex code tends to invite more bugs. If it's simpler, it tends to be a lot easier for me to debug. It tends to be a lot less prone to bugs. And when there are bugs, they aren't as critical. The third thing is that you can come back and understand it, which is, admittedly, they have a little bit of a problem with commenting my code. I need to get better at that, partially probably because I do so many game jams where commenting does not matter much, because I wrote this 2 hours ago, it's fine, I know what it does. Over the course of like months, it kind of comes back to bite me when I haven't commented my code. I try and also code in a way that imitates reality. It's a bit hard of a vague concept to explain, but like, if I have an AI and it's looking for a player, it's all happening on that AI. It's not like there's some AI manager kind of off in the distance. It just helps kind of come back later and be like, okay, I kind of get what's happening because I've written what makes sense. I've written it in places that make sense. And the last one is that it's malleable. You need to experiment with any game. As I've said before, it's like the progress of game, you're going to be doing a lot of different experimentation, like taking a lot of things out and in, and like trying new ideas out. So don't get invested in creating something that is just going to be a pain if you want to come in and be like, okay, I want to let's try not having that happen and do this instead. If it's going to break your entire code base every time you want to experiment, then you're going to have a difficult time making a game. Bugs are an acceptable thing in a game jam. Every game jam I've made has had some weird little bug in it. Plenty of weird little bugs that have like shown up either at the end or after it was finished. In a larger project, this applies kind of as well. You do tend to want to have less bugs and something like that, hopefully. But there are still probably going to be bugs in any published game. It's inevitable that there will be some left. You don't want it to be a complete mess. So what you need to really be doing is judging with any bug how important it is to fix. If it is literally deleting your player's save file, then that is like urgent. You need to fix that ASAP. On the other hand, for example, in Gerrymander, there's this weird bug that shows up very rarely where like one of the squares around a character will be dark green instead of light green. And it's like, it's only happened twice. I could spend time trying to track that thing down and fix it, but it's not really a priority because it's just a small little visual thing that isn't going to make a big difference to the player. It's worth considering that to you something might feel like a big bug because something unintentional is happening, but it's only really a problem if that unintentional thing is a detriment to the player's experience. Like in some instances, bugs are even funny. There are plenty of games where it's like, oh, this is Red Dead Redemption. There's a flying grandma. That's funny. That's great. It's not really a showstopper. Sometimes you have to fix bugs hackily. You should not really do this outside of a game jam. In a game jam, you kind of have to sometimes. But if you're ever really close to a deadline, sometimes these things you just kind of have to do it. Preferably when you do them, it's because you understand why the bug's happening. Maybe there's some element that you just buried deep down in the way the game operates that causes this unintended behavior up here. And the only way to solve that would be to just mess around with this really integral system to your code. And maybe you don't want to do that, so you can just find okay, maybe just put a hack on top and that's fine. Generally it is best not to, But yeah, if you understand the problem, it's fine-ish. One thing we did in one of our games, the players were bees, and so like a bee brawler, Bumble Rumble we called it. And in like the last day of working on this bug showed up where the bees would just slowly drift upwards, and I just could not find out why. I looked everywhere, the bridge bodies was constrained. There's no logical reason why they should be doing this. I was running out of time and I was getting really stressed out about it, and I went and just had like a nice walk, just angry and annoyed that this was happening. And on that walk I just had this like kind of epiphany of like, oh yeah, I know what I do. I come back and I just add to the end of every I store their position, and at the start of every update cycle I put them at that position, and it worked. I don't know why that was happening. I've never gone back to investigate, but it solved it. There's a great Game Sutra article, 30 coding tricks. Oh, I said ticks. Oh dear. Tricks. They have just a whole bunch of these sort of things where a game just have put like a dumb fix. They just like, there was one where a game was like, it was like they had to ship right away, but there was still this error message popping up, and then they can't find out why the error is happening. So they just changed the error to come up as "thank you for playing." It was happening like quickly. And yeah, if your game is a good game, it feels good, it looks good, if it is good, players are going to forgive some of the bugs. They are going to be more forgiving when you might think. If the game is really buggy, they probably won't be. Or if the game overall isn't that great, yeah. It's why, like, Fallout New Vegas is a buggy mess. Assassin's Creed Unity is also a buggy mess. But people don't hate on Fallout New Vegas as much as Assassin's Creed Unity. Because one of those is actually a good game, whereas it's Assassin's Creed. So it's really tempting as like a programmer to always be in like a cycle of like, okay, I have to like write my code as optimized as possible because before I move on to the next thing. But it's going to be kind of an unhealthy thing to get into. As the thing is that what you're writing as optimized is now, the feature may change or you remove it. If you optimize it early, you're going to be less willing to make that change. It's going to be like, but I spent like a week writing this code, I can't just cut it out. If you spend like an hour writing the code, you're going to be a little more willing to just cut it out. It will also make it harder to change. You kind of, it's like, you've written this code for this very specific purpose. It's optimized for that exact environment. When you start changing things around the environment, the optimization doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily as optimized as it's going to be hard to work around that optimization. It's kind of like, it's just like a really stretched metaphor, but like, a person who can make cakes much slower than a machine can make cakes, but if that person can then go and make muffins without no added cost, whereas a machine, it's like, you can't switch what a machine makes. I don't know what at the end of the project, we will have a better idea of where the optimization is needed. It might be that the thing is, you could spend a week optimizing this bit of code, and it was like, in the end, that week was like for like a tiny improvement in frame rate. Whereas if you're at the end, close to the end of the project, like, oh, this bit of code here, that's taking a lot, I can do that better. You also have generally a better idea of how the game works. So it's easy to approach at that stage and go, okay, I know how to do a little trick there that's going to make that one better. The other thing is that the longer you spend optimizing it, you're never going to get something like running
the longer you spend optimizing, the less you get from it. You write a code, spend an hour on it, you run pretty well, you try and optimize that, spend another hour on it, better. Anytime you add on to that, it's just going to, the improvement's going to be less. So here's an example of this kind of thinking, is the fences running in Gerrymander. So the first time I implemented this, it would literally be like every single update cycle was doing a test of the entire grid to like work out who was in whose region. And that's obviously not a great way to code things, but it meant that for the rest of the game development, I never really had to worry about the fences. I never had to think, okay, well, I'm going to change how I draw the fences, I'm going to change how the grid is generated, I can change whatever I want, and I don't have to think about changing that underlying feature. It's just kind of uninvolved with anything else, just doing it in the background. Later on, I was like, okay, this can run a little better. It just seems that all it needs to really do is only run when it's relevant. Like, it doesn't need to be running when you haven't gone line. So I just made it so that when you finish a region, it will just do the recalculation. So there, it does it as soon as you finish drawing. And when I first did do that, there were a few little bugs that started to pop up, like, oh well, I have to consider that the player might draw past the grid and it wouldn't recognize that the region ended because there is nothing outside the grid to tie it to. So there's a whole bunch of edge cases that I had to sort out then. The next thing I could do, basically as it is now, it does still recalculate the entire map every time it calculates. The next thing I could do is do something where it's a bit smarter than that, and it's like it remembers where everyone is and only calculates what's relevant. But I don't really need to do that, and there's a whole bunch of edge cases that are going to pop up if I try to implement something like that. So why add extra work for no real gain? The thing is, especially with Gerrymander, is we don't really need to worry about frame rate too much. It's a puzzle game, and also these people are animated at 15 frames per second. So, and this is not causing any big hurdles anyway. So it doesn't really get any more optimized. It could, but it would just create a whole bunch of extra bugs that I have to sort out. Okay. So I've spoken a lot about how game jams sort of taught me how to work in a large environment, but they are still different, and it's important to keep that in mind. First thing is that you don't really get burnout in a game jam. When you've been working on a project for months, it's like, I'm still doing this. I got this to do, this to do, this to do, this to do. But in 48 hours, it's just, oh yeah, you'll be done in a few hours. There's no real feeling of the burnout, unless you not sleeping, then there is. As I kind of said, I touched on earlier, messy code is fine in a game jam, but it does become a little bit problematic in a longer drawn-out project. It's fine to look back and say, okay, 2 hours ago I did this, I know what it is. 2 hours ago, 2 months ago, maybe it's not that good. Outside of the game jam, if you kind of lose direction of what your project is, in game jam, you're like, okay, here's the stuff you need to do it. It's easy. When you're outside of the game jam, you're like, okay, here's the stuff you need to do. Actually, let's also do this thing. And then keep kind of moving around the scope of your game and lose track of what you're trying to make. Deadlines are really, really, really great incentive to actually get stuff done. In 48 hours, I can do a lot of work for 8 hours. I work way more efficiently in a game jam than I can outside of one, because having like this deadline breathing out your neck is just incredibly motivating. So something maybe I would like to try and do in other future projects is try and incorporate stricter deadlines. We did try and do that at the start of Gerrymander, but then as we found that we weren't meeting those deadlines became kind of vague for us. Which we probably should have done. Okay, like we found a deadline, that's bad, we suck at that, but we just sort of like shrugged it off and moved on. So when you have a limited time in a game, it's easy to kind of let your scope just go wild. That's something that last particular project. Whereas in a game jam, you're just like, okay, I know specifically what needs to be done, and I'm not going to like, if you suggest like an idea halfway through a game jam, and it's like going to be like a huge investment, then there are so much like, what are you talking about? Let's not do that. Shut up. Go back to work. The last thing is that it's a very different thing having random strangers play a game versus having game devs play a game. Game devs kind of are who are going to be audience at a game jam, whereas we've played Gerrymander, we've had Gerrymander taken into like a school and had kids play it. They're not as good at deciphering like the controls and like trying to play around with it as other devs are. Actually, like side note, this is weird. We had like grade 9s, I think, and grade 11s play the game. And you'd think the 11s would be better at it. The 11s were just terrible. They did not like get our game at all. But as soon as we gave the kid in year 9, they just like immediately picked it up and were like great. I don't know why. Maybe it's like that's the cutoff when tablets became a thing in kids' lives. Last slide. So the 40-hour game jam has been cancelled this year, you might have heard. But we are kind of doing a bit of it's not really a 40-hour game jam. It's just going to be like an online weekend where there's you at your home or whatever, just make a game 48 hours and submit it to this itch.io page. Maybe if you're interested, just go to not Brisbane 48-hour game jam on itch.io and register. If I'm at all convinced you the value of game jam, which I hope you have. I think you might get something out of it. So what I've said is kind of very specific to what I've learned. I think if you try one out, you're going to probably learn very good things from it. So just, if you're interested, join us. That's all.
Questions, anyone?
You talked about optimising. Had you first cut the code, run that for that you had to, you couldn't progress through what you wanted because it was just not, and then had to roll it back out, or then concentrate on optimising?
Not really, no. There was a bit in the random generation of the levels that was a bit it was getting stuck taking too long. That's kind of why we ditched the original generation process. Yeah, not really anything that's been like huge critical. It's down like 2 FPS. This is the worst. No.
Do you think you're going to the game jams like a big blank slate, or do you kind of have like some things you're thinking about trying to work into it beforehand?
Usually we have more of like, it's sort of like, goals, I guess. Like, we come and say, okay, here's, like, we bring in, like 1 year we brought in, like a sort of arcade joystick, two arcade joysticks stuck together. We're like, let's make a game using that. We usually come in saying, let's make a multiplayer game. 1 year we're like, let's try and do something that's a bit more like a single player story thing. That's like a global game jam. Like, we don't come in with anything, just simply we have like general feeling going in on what kind of game we're playing.
Any tips for asking how many players? Or do you do predictions or just dot points or feel like
Yeah, just sort of keep generating ideas, I guess, and just usually throw like, once we get like a keyword, we throw like several ideas in the wall and just see what sticks. Just like, okay, here's our words, let's go, okay, let's iterate something here. That's an interesting idea, okay. Put a pin in that, what else can we come up with? Okay, pin in that. And then, you know, one like more attached to, we might be like, okay, what's in there? Is there something we can like do with that, or start trying to like take bits from each of those things we came up with, combine some of them? Yeah, just sort of try and come up with as many ideas as quickly as possible, and then just talk about what you want from the cycle. That's what we're doing. But it's difficult. Yes?
I've heard some people talk about how they prefer to prototype ideas in a game jam-like environment. Like not always 48 hours, but do you think that's something that might work or something to try?
I haven't tried it personally, but that's been something that like I think would be pretty effective. I guess there's not like the same deadline pressure because it's still like an internal force pushing on you, but that would be pretty effective. I think in just like getting something out quickly and seeing what you do with it. Yeah, it'd be valuable. Maybe something like that. I don't know what it is. Like maybe not. I've never prototyped something in that environment. Maybe more like I'm going to try and just get this kind of mechanic done as quickly as possible. I think with the game jam environment, it's like more of a focus on like getting something simple done but kind of polished. Whereas like with prototyping more, you just want the core there. Like you don't even need an art involved. Yeah.
And then just like giving efficiency throughout the entire like time that you have for the game jam, how do you stop bottlenecking of tasks? So like if you're like waiting on another person to finish an asset, I can't code anything for that time. How do you? Is there like an effective way to stop that from happening?
There are some tools, I guess. One thing I've done in a few game jams is, well, it's best not to wait for someone. Like, can you put like some like template? I often just like use a Pokemon Stripe from like first generation. Just like put like a div or whatever in there until the artist is finished. If you find like you're bottlenecking and you need someone's art to carry on, like maybe like what is there something else you can do, I guess. I don't think you should really be in a situation where like, oh, here's one thing you can actually do when you get down, and like I have been in a situation where it's like I am kind of up to where I need to be, and the next thing we need to do is like implementation. That's a good point for a programmer to just take a nap. Because like after like the last day of programming, trying to like implement all these assets in is just stressful and like can be real pain. So you want to be well rested for that. So if you like, you can't find any other tasks going on, you can't put any intent in, then you take it out. That's seriously very valuable. Cool.